9 a.m. in Beijing, Shanghai, and Singapore. Welcome to Bloomberg Markets China Open. I'm Selena Wang.
And I'm Yvonne Man. We're counting down to the open of trade on Hong Kong and mainland markets. Here are the top stories. Dennis Mullenberg pays the price for a tumultuous year at Boeing. He leaves amid the 737 MAX crisis and a failed mission to space. Bring you the latest coming through from Beijing in a moment here. Boeing has named a new CEO after ousting the embattled Dennis Mullenberg. The playmaker is struggling to navigate the 737 MAX crisis and is now telling suppliers to halt parts shipments for a month. Let's get to our chief North Asia correspondent, Stephen Engel. He's been watching all developments here this morning. Is any of this a surprise? Why now? And what was the last straw?
Yeah, I mean, it's significant, but is it a surprise? Not necessarily. If you've seen the problems at Boeing over the last year or the last 9 months, of course, since those two fatal accidents, but there's been a string of other issues. Let's look at the case for Dennis Mullenberg and the case against. And so we know the case against outweighed the case for when the board decided to oust him. Basically, this is a company under Mullenberg became the biggest U.S. industrial giant, surpassing GE. The stock tripled under Mullenberg's watch until March of this year, the early part of this year, until the problems started to surface. He had a laser focus. Compete to win was the mantra, and he drove a hard bargain with suppliers. The criticism comes whether this laser focus, Yvonne, on cost and cash might have come at the expense of safety. And that's where we start looking at the case against Dennis Mullenberg. He has, the successor, who we'll talk about in just a second, David Calhoun, has a long list, a to-do list of building confidence again, not only with regulators, but with customers, with suppliers, with the flying public. Remember, Senator Blumenthal called the 737 MAX a flying coffin. This is, devastating news to the aircraft, really, the successor to the 737, which is the biggest cash generator for Boeing commercial aircraft. So you have those two deadly crashes of the 737 MAX still grounded. It's been grounded since March. You had a public rebuke from the regulator, the FAA. You have all these other issues that the successor is going to have to take care of.
Stephen, yeah, you have the task of mending the relationship with regulators, rescuing the 737 MAX. What is at the top of the priority list for this new CEO?
Well, you would think 737 MAX, right? And then there's other mechanical and engineering issues as well with the tanker. The KC-46 tankers had some production issues. There's delays in the 777X, the next generation of the very successful wide-body 777 aircraft. You have the snafu, if you will, with this space aircraft that was supposed to rendezvous with the International Space Station that did not. So there's a number of technical and mechanical engineering issues. But the number one priority right now, because you have to get that 737 MAX certified airworthy again. It's repairing that relationship with the FAA. And in fact, within hours of Dennis Mullenberg's announcement that he is stepping down, the FAA put out this statement saying the new leadership at Boeing must focus on being transparent in its relationship with the FAA as a safety regulator.
All right. Thank you, Chief North Asia correspondent Stephen Engel. And for more on this, let's bring in Mark Martin, CEO of aviation consultancy Martin Consulting. He now joins us from New Delhi. Mark Martin, when you look at this decision, it's taken quite a long time for this ousting. Is this actually enough to restore confidence, or do we need to see even more leadership changes?
Good morning and happy holidays. Well, the biggest problem with Boeing is not just leadership, but is also a strategic outline that surrounds their core offering, which is in commercial aircraft and airplanes, defense and space. Now, if you look at what's working in Boeing is what they inherited from McDonnell Douglas. Every product, every service program that came from McDonnell Douglas, whether it was the F-18 Hornet, the F-15 Eagle, or their defense platforms have worked extremely well. And what's breaking down here is the core Boeing product, which is, we've seen the CT-100 space Starliner, the 737 MAX, which obviously is clearly because of revenue pressures. But I think the bigger crisis here is Boeing has lost leadership, and morale of people within Boeing would be extremely low. And that's concerning, because if they need to pull out of this, they got to get everybody together, including their own employees. And this is probably the toughest phase that Boeing could possibly deal with.
Mark, is Calhoun the best replacement at this point in time? There's been some criticism that he doesn't have an engineering background. And as you mentioned, a lot of the big challenges they face are in these product areas.
Well, when the chips are down, you need somebody who could roll the sleeves and fix the house and get the place back in order. And this guy comes with that kind of capability of having sorted, previous defense programs and from a project management side. So that does bring in a lot of strategic perspective. Now, going forward, I think Boeing would have to completely realign its market offering because in the commercial aircraft space, as we know, they've also announced a partnership with Embraer. Now, I'm not sure how that's going to help them or save them, but I think they need to fix the 737 MAX or get rid of it for good, because Boeing had mothballed two programs before, the 757 and the 767. So, and those aircraft are in demand at the moment. It might be strategic to bring back the 757 and the 767 program, which is the 4,000, 5,000 nautical mile, 250 to 300 seat aircraft category.
So, mothballing the 737 MAX, do you think that's going to be one of the key things that Calhoun was going to have to deal with? I mean, in terms of really when it comes to what the priorities are, is it more towards the regulators? Is it more towards the customers? Is it more about airlines, supply chain? What is the key focus here now moving forward for Calhoun?
Well, I think the 737 MAX is about a product failure because you've actually forced an engine that's not compatible on a platform. So the best that Boeing can possibly do is go back to the 737-800 and possibly come to some sort of a cash cost benefit program with the airline where they reduce the price and the money you saved on fuel, you're actually going to save an acquisition price of the asset. So it could work for Boeing, but we're not sure if again, as rightly pointed out by Paul, if travelers and the industry and the regulators are going to be convinced. But in my view, I think if you go back to something else which is more stable, at least as an engine platform, because the fix on the MAX, if you really fix it, is going to be at least $20 million per aircraft. And airlines are not going to cough up that kind of money, and so is Boeing. And we all know right now that the industry is dealing with a severe shortage of aircraft, and you've got Airbus knocking on most airlines' doors. So this is a tough phase, and we're hoping that Boeing, it will take them 12 months to pull out of it, but we hope that Boeing does pull out.
And there was, not just when it came to the 737 MAX, but I guess more deep-rooted problems coming through when it came to Boeing as well. You mentioned that Calhoun might be the right guy, but how long is he going to stay in this position? Do you see this as more of a near to midterm type of position for Calhoun, or is there time to actually, or now the time, to bring in someone external into the company?
We're not sure whether this is going to really work for Boeing. It's too early to tell. But what I can say is that if anybody who could save and get them back into some sense of a recovery from the negative they're in at the moment, then I think that he's done his job pretty well. And if he's going to achieve all those tasks, and if he sticks on for at least a year, then at least Boeing should be on a much better footing. But again, this is just such a rough period for Boeing. But again, what's working, let's be clear, is the defense side. And all that came from McDonnell Douglas as part of their acquisition is working extremely well. So, they've got the money coming in. It's just that the brand is severely hit because of the 737 MAX and the Starliner, which failed a few days ago.
And Mark, you mentioned about, what Airbus can stand to gain from all this, I guess. But they won't be able to make the A320 fast enough if they have to, even if we do see airlines switching away from the 737 MAX. So how much can Airbus really gain from all this?
Well, I agree. Production delays will be there. I mean, the fastest you can put together a 320 with certification would be about 5 months, maybe 4.5, 5 months. So that will need a tremendous amount of capital, intense labor to start assembling those aircraft, to churn up and increase production. But the 320neo has its problems of its own with the Pratt & Whitney engine. But again, as we know, Airbus is working with CFM to come with a better technology. So that could be a quick fix. It should take Airbus about 6 months to get to those Boeing customers and give them aircraft, but let's hope Boeing does come back.
Mark, thank you so much for joining us here on this top story today. Mark Martin, CEO of Martin Consulting, joining us from Delhi here this morning.